Dawn in Baghdad just minutes away, and a new day brings unsettling news. An American helicopter down, 16 people on board, no reported survivors.
Target Iraq, a Dateline special. Here now is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Surgical strikes, then pauses, more powerful explosions, more pauses. The goal tonight across Iraq to target, taunt, and terrorize Saddam Hussein and his inner circle. The skies over Baghdad are quiet now at dawn, but there is tension. The Pentagon says the attacks of today are but a taste of what's to come. Here are the latest developments tonight. A U.S. Marine helicopter has gone down in Kuwait. 16 people on board reported to be dead. The heaviest fighting now is reported to be in the towns of Basra in the south and Mosul in the north. And bombs did intense damage earlier today on strategic targets in Baghdad. And here at home, the largest anti-war protest the nation has seen. Thousands of people gathered in Chicago, shutting down the city's famous Lakeshore Drive, staging a march in the middle of rush hour. However, at this hour, all of that is overshadowed by the devastating breaking news, the first confirmed coalition casualties of this war. We get the latest on that now from NBC's Jim Miklaszewski, who joins me at the Pentagon. Jim.
Tom, U.S. military officials say it's now believed that all 16 U.S. Marines and British commandos aboard a U.S. Marine troop transport helicopter were killed tonight when their helicopter crashed somewhere near the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border. These troops, the Marines and the British commandos, were returning from a mission offshore in the Persian Gulf when the helicopter went down. At this time, Tom, it's not believed that the helicopter went down due to hostile fire, but may have gone down because of inclement weather. Nevertheless, whatever the cause, 16 believed dead, the first coalition casualties apparently in this war. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon tonight. Since the first surprising strikes just over 24 hours ago, the battle over Baghdad has unfolded at a furious pace. NBC's Dennis Murphy tonight with an overview of a long day's journey into war.
Parts of central Baghdad were burning out of control tonight. A government ministry run by one of Saddam Hussein's sons, a presidential palace, a home of one of Saddam's wives, Republican Guard strongholds, all hit in a brief but ferocious assault from U.S. cruise missiles and 2,000-pound penetrating bombs. Peter Arnett, reporting for National Geographic Explorer and NBC News, described the view from his window as thunderous explosions lit up the night sky shortly after 9 p.m. Baghdad time.
Big explosion near the presidential palace. You will hear those explosions now.
It's the second attack on Baghdad in 16 hours. Missiles launched from sea. Smart bombs dropped from stealth warplanes like this one. U.S. officials said they intend to hit the apparatus of Saddam's Stalinist state like a boxer. Punch hard, step back, pause, and see if it needs another one. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said today the big violent display is just beginning.
What will follow will not be a repeat of any other conflict. It will be of a force and scope and scale that has been beyond what has been seen before.
To the south, U.S. Army howitzers slammed shell after shell into Iraq from the Kuwaiti border. And then the ground war was on. U.S. Army and Marine units are in Iraq tonight, pushing north in coordination with British troops. Some forces are coming under light fire. So far, one coastal Iraqi town has been taken. And a Special Forces helicopter made what U.S. officers describe as a safe crash landing in operations near Baghdad early Thursday. The Iraqis claim they shot it down. The crew of 6 was safely evacuated. The Iraqis also fired some mortar and rockets to no effect at U.S. troops that haven't moved out yet on the Kuwaiti side. NBC's Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne joined the soldiers as they put on gas masks while a horn honked out a warning of another missile attack. Scenes like this were repeated many times today along the Kuwaiti front. The war began yesterday at dawn Iraqi time with the first air raid, a total fake-out, a directed lightning attempt to kill Saddam Hussein and his top leaders. Anti-aircraft fire over Baghdad was followed moments later by an orange fireball at what was described as a target of opportunity. A private home outside Baghdad, where electronic intelligence gathering had eavesdropped on a meeting of top-ranking senior Iraqi military, as well as Saddam and possibly both his sons, Qusay and Uday. The compound was flattened by a barrage of cruise missiles and 2 bunker-buster bombs designed to slam into subterranean chambers and explode. A few hours later, Saddam Hussein appeared on tape on Iraqi TV denouncing the president as Bush Jr., a criminal. But some U.S. officials wondered whether the subdued man with the unfamiliar glasses, reading listlessly from a lined pad, was actually Saddam or a double. Tonight, some analysts believe this is Saddam, but think the message may have been taped before the first air raid. So the question remains, is Saddam dead or alive? As U.S.-led forces under the cover of artillery barrages make their way toward Baghdad and provincial cities, propaganda leaflets explaining to the Iraqis how to surrender are being printed and airdropped by the millions. If the Iraqis do make a stand, it is likely, military strategists think, that it will happen in Baghdad, the sprawling city of 5 million people, an ancient capital enshrouded tonight in smoke and paralyzed by a fear it's hard to imagine.
And I'm joined now by NBC News correspondent David Bloom, who's an embedded journalist with the 3rd Infantry Division, which went across the line into Iraq. It will be the tip of the spear. David, what can you tell us about what you have seen today?
Tom, what we've seen in the last, say, 12 hours or so is the following. Our unit started to fire artillery into Iraq around 8 p.m. local time, which would be noon back in New York. For about a half an hour, they fired artillery on 2 Iraqi observation posts, and then they started to move toward the Iraqi border. They first crossed a berm on the Kuwaiti side, then they crossed through a electrical fence that their earlier scouts had already cut holes through. And then we moved into Iraq itself at about 10:10 p.m. local time, so about 2:10 in the afternoon New York time. And we've been moving into Iraq ever since with the lead elements of the 3rd Infantry Division, the Spartan Brigade. We crossed through an Iraqi minefield, which had been marked with the chem lights for guidance as we walked, as we rolled through into Iraq. We crossed through unexploded ordnance from the 1991 Persian Gulf War that American warplanes had dropped, but that these tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles and other vehicles that form the lead elements of the 3rd ID had to be wary of. Those also had been marked with a path through where they could safely travel. At that point, we saw destroyed Iraqi T-72 tanks from the first Gulf War, destroyed Iraqi armored personnel carriers from the first Iraq War. I can tell you that this is the 315 Infantry, and they were the ones who headed straight for those Iraqi observation posts, which each contained roughly 30 or so Iraqis who they had to take out, if you will, to make sure that they did not relay messages back to Baghdad as to the precise location where this 3rd Infantry Division was coming through. They encountered some light resistance, but as far as we've been told, no American casualties so far. What they've done is they've moved into Iraq, and the bulwark of the 3rd Infantry Division will now be rolling in here. But right now, we are literally at the front lines. There are no American units, at least not with the 3rd Infantry Division, that are ahead of us right here into Iraq. Tom?
All right, David, final question, because I know that you've got other things to do. Have you encountered any resistance or seen any Iraqi troops on the horizon?
We have not, Tom. There was a report of some Iraqis in a vehicle that these soldiers were giving pursuit to because obviously the critical aspect for them is to not let messages get relayed back to Baghdad as to the precise location of this large mechanized infantry division. That's the only opposition that they've seen. We're at those quote-unquote Iraqi observation posts. Having said that, they did not expect to encounter any opposition right at the outset. There are 3 regular Army Iraqi divisions here in southern Iraq. They have not confronted them yet. They did not expect to. They're carrying with them what they call capitulation documents, which are forms that those Iraqi commanders can sign if they want to surrender to the American forces rather than fight. But keep in mind, the unit that we're with right now is the vanguard of this 3rd Infantry Division. It's some tanks, some Bradleys, some infantrymen, but it's a pretty small force that literally is, as they say in the 3rd ID, the tip of the spear, and thus we have not encountered any observation or any opposition whatsoever at this point. Tom?
Thanks very much. NBC's David Bloom with the 3rd Infantry Division as they move deeper and deeper into Iraq. Thanks very much, David. Be safe. David Bloom, the tip of the spear at 6:10 in the morning in Iraq. Let's go now to Peter Arnett in Baghdad for an assessment of what is going on there. Peter is on assignment for National Geographic Explorer and for NBC News. Peter, what are you seeing from your hotel room tonight?
Well, Tom, it is dawn in Baghdad in the morning of the 2nd day of the war. What I'm looking at now is smoke rising from the most significant target that we know of in this bombing campaign so far. The remains of the officers of Qusay Hussein. He is the favored son of President Saddam Hussein. His office was hit last night at 9 o'clock in the heaviest wave of bombing here. Fierce fires for the first few hours, and now white smoke rising from that building. It is in the heart of downtown Baghdad. To the further to the east of that, to the west of that, there was a second building hit in this sprawling presidential compound. We are not sure what that building was. It burned for a while. There is no smoke now. Now, another significant target about this time yesterday in the first wave was the location, the believed location of the president himself. Iraqi officials have since said that one of the targets was the home of Sajida Hussein, the wife of the president, the home of his wife and 3 daughters. They say, however, that the family did escape from the bombing. We are still to learn of the actual the locations and the designations of at least 5 or 6 other bombing targets that have happened in the last 24 hours, Tom. They are believed all to be leadership targets because the utilities of Baghdad remain standing. The lights are burning in the city all night. Water is flowing, Tom. All
right, thanks very much, Peter Arnett. We'll ask you to stand by there throughout the evening and into the early morning hours. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is in Qatar, where the U.S. Central Military Command is running this war. Kelly, what's next for Operation Iraqi Freedom?
Well, Tom, I've just been speaking to some of the officials here who are still trying to sort out details relating to the crash and loss of life of U.S. and U.K. forces just a couple of hours ago. It has been a very tense time. They have described so far that all of the people who have been in the war room have been, to this point, calm and professional. I apologize for the wind here. One of the things they've been indicating to me is that the psychological operations have been a key part of this campaign. Beyond the leafleting, beyond the radio broadcast that we've been telling you about, the leafleting now numbering about 19 million or so, trying to communicate directly to Iraqi troops and Iraqi civilians to give them instructions about what to do, not to engage with U.S. troops. These psychological operations go significantly beyond that, I'm told, and when we are given some briefings, perhaps as early as today, we may learn more about that. Also, officials say that what they've really been trying to do, both in the limited media access that we have had, very limited information has been coming out of U.S. Central Command. That, along with the strategic operations, has been intended to try to create as much chaos within the Iraqi military as possible. That, according to a senior U.S. CENTCOM official, to make it difficult for them to react. We'll keep you posted, Tom, as we're checking to try and find out the very latest. Tom?
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell tonight in Qatar. So far, no chemical attacks on U.S. forces, but it is a fear that will not go away. Here's John Hockenberry.
It's the signal that tells every U.S. soldier to stop what they're doing. The scenario played out a number of times over the past 24 hours in Qatar and in Kuwait. The 101st Airborne in Kuwait and NBC's Dana Lewis traveling with them heard the sirens for the first time just hours after President Bush announced the start of the war. The troops and the correspondent put on their gas masks and got in bunkers to wait out the first missile attack against Americans of this new war.
This is considered not to be any kind of a drill. There was no scheduled drill. This is the real thing.
The question on every soldier's mind, might they be under a chemical attack?
Is it unnerving for you?
Yeah, anytime you're going to get insecticide for people on you, it is. I mean, who wouldn't it be unnerving for?
The troops get the all clear to leave their bunkers. The Al Samud that hit nearby apparently did not disperse toxic chemicals. The masks can come off. Throughout the region today, tense drills like these, suspicion that Saddam Hussein may have used chemical weapons.
A U.S. Marine took me by the shoulders, grabbed me and threw me into a bunker and said we're under attack.
But each time so far, a false alarm.
Thank you. I've just been told that was the all clear.
A chemical attack. Defense against it does not involve Patriot missiles. It is this and only this. Chemical suits and masks put on in a hurry no matter what. Will these defenses be put to the test?
I think we only have to go back in history to know the answer to that.
Major General John Doesberg is in charge of the Army's chemical and biological warfare defense.
Saddam Hussein in the past has used chemical agents. He's used chemical agents against Iran, and he's used them against the Kurds. That should concern us.
Troops in the field have been told to expect anything from Saddam's arsenal. Are these suits and masks up to the task of protecting advancing soldiers? The Pentagon says yes.
We have the best army in the world, and we have the best capability in the world to protect them.
But critics like 1991 Gulf War veteran Steve Robinson aren't so confident, citing a congressional study indicating defects.
A large percentage of the gas masks were reported to be defective, just as far back as a year ago. They say that the chemical detectors they use are defective.
Defense officials say those problems have been corrected, and the troops will be adequately protected when the alarm sounds. But the only way to really know is in a real attack. An attack which no one wants, except perhaps Saddam Hussein.
We just saw part of the long day of Dana Lewis, who's with 101st Airborne. He joins us now. It's a new day for the 101st, and I gather that they're still in their fixed positions, Dana.
They are, Tom. I think that you will see elements of the 101st moving to locations that, of course, we wouldn't want to announce in advance. But I think the plan has always been that as the 3rd Infantry moves up, the 101st will move in behind and start to set up some forward refueling bases. First of all, for those Apache attack helicopters that we know have been active overnight, the longer they have to travel, you can subtract that from the time that they then have on station, that they're able to protect the troops in the field, that they're able to move on radar sites and take those out. So they want to be able to move forward refueling points forward as possible so those helicopters can stay on station as long as they can. It has been a sleepless night here overnight. A number of alarms going off. I think since midnight we've had about 3 of them. And I was just talking to one of the commander's staff here, and he tells me that in every one of those cases there were missile launches from Iraq towards us, and in each case the missiles came down in the Kuwaiti desert. In the last case, a couple of hours ago, Tom, that missile was intercepted by the Patriot anti-missile battery, and that missile landed very, very close to us. I don't want to say how close because it may help the Iraqis start to determine trajectory and improve their aim, which none of us would like to see at this point, but it was very close indeed. Through the night, we have also seen some outgoing from here. We've heard the big 155mm artillery that started to fire just as the 3rd Infantry was moving across the border. And then in the middle of the night here, we also saw flashes in the sky, light beams that seemed to slowly extend out, hang in the sky in an arc, and then head towards the northeast, towards Iraq. We were later told that that was the MLRS, the multiple launch rocket system of the U.S. forces hitting targets in southern Iraq. Tom?
All right, thanks very much. Dana Lewis, who's with the 101st, some frightening moments for him. David Bloom is on the move. These are live pictures now as they're moving across the desert. This is the 3rd Infantry Division. This is the tip of the spear. It's a huge division. It's called the 3rd Infantry Division, but it's largely mechanized, a lot of armor, Bradley fighting vehicles, Abrams tanks, and this is the outfit that is expected to get to Baghdad first from the south, maybe not in advance of Special Operations Forces, but nonetheless they are moving steadily northward. And based on the earlier report that we had from David Bloom, they did not encounter any resistance after they took out 2 observation posts. And it sounds like there were about 30 casualties there, that they were forced to wipe out those posts so that they would not communicate back to Baghdad, that the 3rd Infantry was now on the move. That's a very flat piece of the desert. It's open space. The question is what happens when they get to a very intricate canal system. Will they use the bridges that are already in place, or will they begin to put down their own bridges? As we witnessed earlier during the bombardment today, there was a question that simply has not gone away. Was that really Saddam Hussein who appeared on television last night after the hit on his bunker? He appeared about 3 hours after the surprise attack on Baghdad, or did he? Here's NBC's Andrea Mitchell.
Tom, the U.S. is trying to get Iraq's military to surrender by showing them just how easily the U.S. has been able to track and target Saddam Hussein. But the mystery tonight is he alive or dead? It's been said that war is a deceitful game. So when an image purportedly of Saddam was broadcast over Iraqi airwaves last night, hours after the U.S. tried to kill him, deception was on the minds of many. Was it really Saddam, or a body double? Was this a taped address, or live? And the money question, had he survived the attack? Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld today said analysts are looking at the tape to see if it's real or a fake.
There's debate about that.
There are questions about the tape precisely because deception is one of the few military options open to Saddam. He has used body doubles before. And he could use a double to conceal his whereabouts or to show that he's in control when he really isn't. But Andrew Coburn, who's written about Saddam, says he doesn't think that's what happened here.
I believe he does have body doubles, but he would never let, I don't think, someone else go on the air and in a crucial speech at a crucial moment to the Iraqi people. I mean, you know, that would be ceding control. He will never do that.
In fact, Coburn says the televised appearance convinced him it was the real Saddam.
It's a man who's under pressure. There's a man who's, you know, doing, it looks like he was doing it in a hurry.
Still, there are curious details in Saddam's appearance. His posture seems weak. He's almost slouching. Not the strapping Saddam we've seen so often, although he is known to suffer back problems. He's known to wear glasses, but government analysts tell NBC News they've never seen him in these glasses. Buried in all of this might be vital clues for U.S. strategic military planners who need to know as much as they can about where Saddam is and how he's doing. Intelligence analysts pore over every frame of a video like this, searching for clues.
Was this something prepackaged before the war began, or was this something that was delivered after the strikes or war, which would give some indication about whether he survived it or not?
Former CIA officer Michael Vickers says analysts have a number of high-tech tools at their disposal, including software that looks at voice patterns.
Anyone with a known voice print, where you can have a library of that, then you've got a database to match.
But it's not just how he sounds. It's also the intricacies of what he's saying. There may be clues about whether it was pre-taped or broadcast live. That could say a lot about whether Saddam is still in command.
A leader of a country under attack has got to try to rally his population and army. And so it's very important once the war begins to say, you know, I'm in charge.
NBC News has learned that early voice recognition studies support the theory that it is Saddam, although it's not conclusive. But there is still doubt about when the tape was made, before or after the first U.S. attack. For now, we have to wait and see. And tonight there is increased chatter among top Iraqi officials, indicating if the U.S. did not get Saddam, they may well have gotten other top leaders, possibly even his powerful son. Tom?
NBC's Andrea Mitchell, thank you very much. There is more on last night's attack on Saddam, thanks to some late reporting by the Washington Post team. We're joined now by the Post Dana Priest. What have you learned about what they knew about where Saddam was when the president said, go ahead and do it?
Well, Tom, U.S. government officials have told the Washington Post today that while we might have been surprised to see the videotape, they weren't, because they actually knew that he had made some videotapes this week And in each one of them, he used a different date just for this purpose, so that he could deceive us in the event that there was a strike and put off the inevitable conclusion about whether he was dead or alive. What's more interesting, though, also is that after 24 hours of looking at the building they struck and listening to things coming out of there, they believe that he still was in the building when it was hit by those 42 bombs and missiles. So the big question is, if he was still there, what condition is he in? And that's where the great debate is. There are indications that he was injured, although there are some people that say possibly he was not. Just to cover their bases on the tapes, however, they did bring in a former mistress of Saddam Hussein who looked at them, and she doesn't think that that's who it is.
Dana, what about the sons, Uday and Qusay? Do they think that they were there as well?
Yes, they do. And of course, they also probably met the same fate. They were all in a bunker, and they believe they demolished the bunker. That's one of the hardest targets to hit, and that's why they used 2,000-pound bunker-busting bombs that they actually had never used before.
All right, thanks very much, Dana Priest, part of the crack Washington Post reporting team who developed that story overnight. We're now joined by the commander of the first Gulf War, General Norman Schwarzkopf, who is an analyst for NBC News. Norman, what do you make of all of this about Saddam Hussein and having him pinpointed and trying to determine whether he's alive or not?
Well, you know, the old Clausewitzian theory of center of gravity, once it's destroyed, the nation will lose its will to fight. And Saddam certainly is a center of gravity for the Kuwaitis, for the Iraqis. So if he was hit and he's finished, it's not going to be long before it's all over.
Based on what you're seeing in terms of how the American battle plan is being executed and the absence of response, or a very anemic response on the part of the Iraqis, does that tell you anything?
Not really. You know, the Third ID had a huge artillery prep before they went ahead and launched the attack. That could have caused whatever forces were out there to withdraw and get out of the way as quickly as they possibly could. But the fact that the El Fal Peninsula is occupied, the fact that the Third ID is moving at will at the present time, the fact that the air attacks are going off, not as we expected, but certainly with a great deal of success, all of it sounds pretty good at this stage of the game.
You're aware of those reports as well, that senior American officials have contacted senior Republican Guard officials, and there are some preliminary discussions, we're told, about the possibility of surrender terms.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that one blows my mind. You know, Saddam hasn't been very successful with his generals, and he doesn't trust any of them other than the Republican Guard generals that are supposedly personally selected by him. If these folks are, in fact, engaged in secret talks and he finds out, they're as good as dead in a big hurry. So it really surprised me that we made the announcement that those talks were, in fact, going on.
All right, thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf. By the way, are you surprised by despite all the talk about shock and awe, that the battle plan is unfolding the way it is?
Well, yeah, I think we all were surprised last night that when we were all sitting there together and the first strike came in, and it was as small as it was, and now it continues to be that way. But you know, you can't argue with success, and so far they've been pretty successful.
Well, shock and awe can come in small packages as long as they're effective.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was commander, of course, during Operation Desert Storm. For weeks, the drumbeat of war has included that phrase, shock and awe, to describe the first major assault. What was perhaps shocking was that's not quite how it turned out. It began instead with a surgical strike aimed directly at Saddam Hussein. So what more can we expect from this unique military strategy? Victoria Corderi tonight with a man behind it.
It will be of a force and scope and scale that has been beyond what has been seen before.
Shock and awe is designed to stun the opposition into submission, first by psychological propaganda, then by an overwhelming and precise use of force, striking multiple strategic targets, disrupting communication and command centers, and creating confusion and fear.
What you do is through the simultaneous effort, so intimidate, so overwhelm the adversary, they look around and say, oh my God, there's better things to do than fight a war.
Harlan Ullman helped conceive the strategy and coin the term shock and awe. He says no one from the administration has consulted him directly, but the former naval officer once taught Secretary of State Colin Powell at the National War College. And he says Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was briefly part of the group that formulated the strategy a decade ago. Ullman says yesterday's surprise attack on Hussein, while not massive in scope, fits neatly into this philosophy developed by others long ago. The goal is to decapitate the enemy.
How did this concept originate?
Well, actually, the roots of this concept go back to China several thousand years ago when Sun Tzu, the famous military philosopher, wrote that the best way to win a battle is to win it without fighting it.
Ullman says the ultimate example of shock and awe was the dropping of the atomic bomb during World War II.
2 nuclear weapons, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, caused the Japanese to quit. Now, that was shock and awe, and every time I use that analogy, people say, well, you're going to destroy Baghdad. No, that's not what we want to do. What you're trying to do, in essence, is to get an enemy who was suicidal in the extreme to quit. That's shock and awe.
Still, Ullman admits much could go wrong. Some of the new high-tech weapons are untested in battle. There could be serious collateral damage, destruction and loss of innocent life.
Couldn't part of that collateral damage also be unwittingly hitting chemical or biological weapons?
Sure, and that was a problem in 1991. But I think we're going to be very sensitive to what we aim for if we think it's WMD, weapons of mass destruction.
But we don't even know where they are.
Well, I don't know. I hope we do.
Despite the risks, Ullman says shock and awe is far better than search and destroy, and may end up saving many more lives on both sides of this conflict.
And we just hope that by doing it this way, that the Iraqi military and political leadership will understand the desperate situation they're in and do the smart thing, which is surrender. But at this stage, who knows? One hopes.
And of course, with the war underway, there is increased concern about security here at home. My colleague Stone Phillips has been tracking that.
Tom, the war against terrorism continues even as the war against Iraq intensified. Tonight, some disquieting news. An FBI bulletin has gone out to law enforcement agencies across the country to be on the lookout for a man believed to be a top al-Qaeda field commander who may be planning new terror attacks here. Joining us now from Washington with the latest on this, NBC's Pete Williams. Pete?
Well, Stone, he is someone the FBI is very concerned about tonight. The Bureau sent out a worldwide bulletin today asking for help in finding him. We know his name, Adnan G. El Shukra Juma. He's 27 from Saudi Arabia, and officials believe he could be the leader of an al-Qaeda terrorist cell, just as Mohammed Atta was the key operative behind the 9/11 attacks. FBI agents today searched a house in Miramar, Florida, which is Shukra Juma's last known address. And while they were there, they interviewed his parents. His family says he's no terrorist and that he's living in Morocco. But investigators say captured al-Qaeda operatives have told them that Shukra Juma would be central to the planning for any further terrorist attacks against Americans, either here or overseas. There's also some intelligence that he's a pilot, but the FBI tonight says it's still trying to verify that, Stone.
15,000 Iraqis living in this country. Is this on a voluntary basis, Pete?
Yes, it is very much so. Voluntary in the sense that no one has to talk to the FBI. The FBI justifies this publicly by saying they want to make sure there are no hate crimes against any Iraqis here. But nonetheless, it's clear they're very interested in hearing from Iraqis about anything unusual they may see in the Arab community, anything they may hear at home from relatives still in Iraq about potential threats against the U.S. There have been some protests about this, civil liberties group saying it's not really voluntary when the FBI comes knocking at the door. But the FBI believes it really has no choice and has started to do this very explicitly because of the combat in Iraq.
And a closed-door hearing on Capitol Hill today on how to protect commercial airliners from terrorists using those shoulder-fired missiles. A growing concern, isn't it?
Very much so, about that threat, especially to U.S. airliners that operate not so much domestically but overseas. Now, at that hearing, the Transportation Security Administration said there are no credible threats involving shoulder-fired missiles, nothing specific that they know of. But nonetheless, as you say, some members of Congress are very worried that these weapons are widespread around the world, and they want Congress to help airlines that fly overseas develop some kind of defenses, some kind of countermeasures that would help limit the effectiveness of these missiles, Stone.
Pete Williams tonight from Washington. Thanks, Pete.
Yes, sir.
As U.S. troops moved into Iraq today, a kind of security umbrella was opening over the home front from coast to coast. In Arizona, National Guard troops were sent to the nation's biggest commercial nuclear power plant following an apparent threat there. Maybe you've noticed increased security where you live. But nowhere was it more apparent, and many say more essential, than here in New York. Chris Hansen is here with that story. Chris?
Terminal. As you can see, it's a very busy place, and the mood was rather jittery today as the millions of people who depend on subways and trains to get in and out of and around New York City went on their way. But you need to know a couple of things. They're taking a lot of precautions today, and even though we've known for a long time that in fact the terrorist threat potential in New York's transit system is high, they are putting a number of very heavy-duty security measures in place.
If the lifeblood of New York City is its mass transit system, this is its heart. The majestic Grand Central Terminal, and tonight as explosions are heard in Baghdad, it is also considered a prime terrorist target. It's a major hub in a massive system that moves 7 million people around this city every day, and nearly 1 million more on commuter trains connecting the city and the suburbs. Today, signs of the heightened wartime alert were everywhere. Vehicle searches on the outside, bomb-sniffing dogs and National Guardsmen on the inside. And longtime transit workers suddenly had pouches containing gas masks strapped to their bodies.
What has the world come to where you have to carry a gas mask with you just to work in Grand Central Terminal here in New York?
It's crazy, but that's the side of the times.
Officials are so concerned about mass transit being a target that the governors of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey made an unprecedented announcement that they had agreed to let each other's law enforcement officers operate in all 3 states in order to protect commuters.
We are working to upgrade security across our state, and in particular today we're focusing on mass transit.
And so are the police, who are responsible for the majority of New York subways.
This is a hub of activity for people who have to come and go through New York City.
New York City Police Chief Bill Calhoun is responsible for making sure the millions who ride the subways have a safe trip. One of the busiest subway lines in town runs in and out of Grand Central.
You see bomb-sniffing dogs, you see New York police officers, National Guardsmen. What's the purpose of all that? Why is that so important?
Definition of your question, you see them. Let me also tell you, there are some things you don't see.
Like undercover officers riding on the subways. Sensors that Calhoun says can detect a chemical, biological, or radioactive attack placed throughout the 700 miles of subway track. There's also surveillance at 31 entrances where subway tunnels go under rivers.
At each one of those portals, I have assigned officers constantly, 24 hours, 7 days a week.
For commuters, it's all part of the new reality molded by 9/11, hardened by war.
Not particularly anxious.
You don't think there's much of a risk for you to take mass transit?
I think there's just as much risk as I get hit by a truck.
It makes me a little more anxious, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Why so?
Well, maybe they know more than they're letting on. Maybe the threat is more real than they're willing to share with us.
What can you say that will make people comfortable taking the mass transit system you're in charge of protecting?
I got here by train. What can I tell you?
There's a man who practices what he preaches. Just to give you a sense of how busy this building gets, on any given day, 700,000 people will pass through this building. And just to give you an idea of just how tight security is, we saw a police officer today on a 3rd-floor catwalk with a bomb-sniffing dog, an unusual sight in cautious times. Stone?
Chris Hansen tonight at the terminal that never sleeps in the city that never sleeps, Grand Central Station. Thanks, Chris. Protest, prayer, however they choose to express themselves, it's clear the events in Iraq are giving Americans plenty to ponder. So what's the mood of the country on this second day of war? Maria Shriver has been taking the pulse of the nation.
The nation may be on high alert, but most Americans are trying to go about their normal lives while still expressing the wide variety of opinions that have always characterized this nation. Across the country, the headlines were the same. In Chicago, in Atlanta, and Charlotte, North Carolina, the war had begun. But Americans dealt with that news in very different ways. At the New York Stock Exchange, a moment of silence to start the day. But then it was business as usual, upbeat in fact, as the markets ended the day higher. In San Francisco's financial district, anti-war protesters linked themselves with metal pipes and blocked the streets. 500 people were arrested. Demonstrators also lined the streets in Tampa, Florida. while students at more than 30 high schools throughout Minnesota walked out of classes to voice opposition to the war. Despite the protests, polls show a majority of Americans support the war. About 2,000 people rallied behind the government in Jackson, Mississippi. But perhaps no one supports the war more than the people in the Central California town of Ceres. Baghdad. It is home to a large Iraqi exile community.
I'm very happy, and because this is the moment we've been waiting for.
Janet Schumann runs a small television station operated by the Iraqi exiles. They have been broadcasting war news non-stop since the first bombs fell, both in their native Arabic and in English.
George W. Bush, congratulations. This is the moment that the Iraqi people finally will be free and they can live freely in our homeland.
But just down the road in Modesto, the war brought out different emotions. A chain of French dry cleaners, actually owned by a Lebanese American, was shot at and set on fire. But for most Americans, the day has not been filled with protest or anger or fear. Life has just gone forward as always. In Las Vegas, casinos report their rooms are full and golf courses are booked. The NCAA college basketball tournament in Arizona went on. The stands were filled and people tuned in. In Sacramento, more than 100 people lined up to get bobblehead dolls of their favorite local sports heroes. In Pittsburgh, life moved on in a big way. Erin Ross and her husband Joe gave birth to sextuplets, 6 babies.
I was able to watch them, be delivered. It's amazing.
If we change our lives here, if we stop living normally, if we stop being free and able to go about our business, then they succeed.
Barry Glassner is a professor of sociology and author of the bestseller, The Culture of Fear.
People I've talked to say they feel conflicted. They don't want to look frivolous, like they're out having a great time, going to a game or going to a movie or going to a dance or a party when people are dying and their families are in turmoil.
We really don't contribute anything to the government's effort or to the war effort, or if we're on the other side, to the peace effort, simply by sitting around and doing nothing and canceling our normal activities.
Experts say keeping an eye on both the war and everyday life is crucial to keeping your anxiety low and your pulse down.
Thanks, Maria. And tonight in Chicago, police on foot and on horseback faced thousands of protesters in one of the largest anti-war demonstrations the nation has seen in years. The demonstrators swarmed onto Lakeshore Drive, one of the city's main arteries, shutting down the street at the height of rush hour. That's it from here. Tom, back to you.
Thanks very much, Stone Phillips. Now let's go back to NBC's David Bloom, who is moving with the 3rd Infantry. You can see him there. He's deep in Iraq, or at least as deep as any other American unit. Where are you at this point, David? Can you give us a general idea?
We're in southern Iraq, Tom, and that's about all we're permitted to say. I understand that there's some videotape, though, that we fed in within the last several minutes, which will show you what it's been like for us these past several hours. You recall that near the top of the broadcast, I described that we left from the Kuwaiti side of the border around 8:30 local time, around 12:30 in the afternoon, New York time, but that was preceded by about a half hour of artillery shelling on 2 Iraqi observation posts. They were trying to destroy those observation posts and the 30 or so Iraqi soldiers who were inside each of those observation posts, because they wanted to make sure that they could not relay information back to Baghdad as to the precise location of this large movement by the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. That was followed by us moving into Iraq. We crossed the Kuwaiti berm, which is about a 30-foot high wall of sand that had been cut through. Then we cut through electrical fences, and then we were onto the Iraqi side through a berm on the Iraqi side, which is also about 30 feet high. I can't tell, Tom, exactly what video you're seeing right now, obviously, but in addition to that, we went through minefields, and we also went through unexploded ordnance from the First Persian Gulf War. And what you may see are these orange or yellow or green lights which allow us to make a track through there safely that the scouts had laid down so that these vehicles, which were the first vehicles to go through, could move through safely. So, Tom, right now we're into southern Iraq. We're with, as I say, the 2nd Brigade, the Spartan Brigade of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. We're also with what's called the 315 Infantry, which are mostly the Bradleys and a tank platoon as well, carrying infantrymen who are out ahead, leading the charge, if you will, for the other larger mechanized units to follow on. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, David Bloom. We're going to go to Kerry Sanders. The first we've heard from him as well. He's with the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. I think I've got the units right. Kerry, where are you, and what can you tell us?
Tom. Well, I can tell you that we're just south of David. We can't give too much specific information because of the sensitive nature of it, but we had a tremendous light show here last night. Lieutenant Colonel Royal Mortensen with the 2-8 is here with me. First of all, that light show we saw last night, we're going to look at some pictures of this. What was that?
It appeared to us to be MLRS or ATACMs. Obviously, there were some fires emanating from this area going towards the north.
And we didn't see any return fire at all?
Not that we could see either. I mean, the Marines were dug in around here, dug in last night. We didn't see anything coming back this way at all. Just saw a lot of outgoing.
Now, as the Marines were here last night and dug in, as you say, they're waking up now as the sun is just getting up. What is in the mind of a Marine right now? Well,
they might not have gotten much sleep last night. Even though they may have been tired, that light show was a first for most of them. And I'm sure it energized some of their thoughts about what may lie ahead. They're making mental preparations for what they know to be potentially be combat operations, if you will, and each one of them will handle individually and on their own personal way.
You gave them sort of a pep talk yesterday. What was the highlight? The thing that stuck in my mind is what you told them about you make a decision and stick with your decision if you feel threatened.
Basically, what I always try to drive home with them is that they're professionals, and a professional, while he has the option of shooting, he makes that decision with experience and knowledge. But I try to impress upon them that I won't second guess them. That it's a tough decision for anyone to make, a 19, 20, 20-year-old, 22-year-old Marine. When he makes that decision to shoot, it's based on the information he has at the moment. And it's important for them to know that their chain of command and the military in general and their country will support them in that decision and not second guess them. They'll have tough decisions out there. There's going to be non-combatants, there's going to be enemy, there's going to be friendlies. It's night, day, tough decisions.
Okay, one thing I wanted to point out here, Tom, as you can see, the Lieutenant Colonel is in what they call mop gear. In fact, we'll be asked to get into this shortly. There's sort of a deadline approaching, and that is this gear here, and that mop gear is designed as a chemical protection suit?
Yes, it is. It's charcoal lined and protects you against chemical and biological agents, if you will.
And as you moved yesterday on your journey, there were at least three warnings, as it were, 3 alerts to put the gas masks on. Is there just sort of a hair trigger right now, or was there a real good reason to think there may be a gas or biological agent in the area?
Well, anytime there's a report of a potential scud launch or what may have been a potential scud launch, it's just precautionary measures to quickly go into gas masks, even when you're on the move. And you're right, when we were moving to these positions yesterday, we did get a few reports, and it's precautionary. The Marines are used to doing it, so they even do it while they're moving down the road. It happens very quickly. Hair trigger, I don't know. I think it's just better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely. Well, we certainly put our gas masks on without any question at all. I can tell you, though, when we put our masks on, unlike the Marines who've had a lot of training at this, it gets particularly hot, and if you haven't spent a whole lot of time in those masks, it really takes a little bit out of you as the day progresses. One thing I wanted to point out is just a short, well, I can't really reveal that. What I can say is that we do know that there has been a battle reported for the Ramallah oil fields, and we also know that hiding in amongst the scrap yards from the old Gulf War 12 years ago, there have been some T-72 tanks that have been spotted, and at least one has been taken out. But the Iraqi military has apparently hidden some of their forces in those scrap yards. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, Kerry Sanders, who's with the 8th Marines, and it looks like they're getting ready to move into some fairly serious territory. And we're joined now by retired Army General Monty Meigs, who 12 years ago was in a very similar situation. He was in the Army, not the Marines at the time. He was leading an armored brigade across the desert at that time. We've been talking a lot about what happened in Baghdad in the last 24 hours. How critical are the attacks in Baghdad to these young Marines who are moving up and the guys with the with the 3rd Infantry Division that David Bloom has been reporting on?
Okay, Tom, we'll go into downtown Baghdad and show you some potential targets and then extrapolate it back. We're going to be in the western part of the city where Peter Arnett was telling us last night there were a bunch of targets hit. And the targets we're going to show are nominal. We don't know for sure that these were ones, but these are all having to do with the Republican Guard and the intelligence system. You take those out, you deny the enemy his eyes to some extent. He's losing some of his command and control. And while it doesn't have an immediate impact for those Marines and troopers in the Marne Division, it does have an impact as they come closer and closer to Baghdad. And of course, this is part of the shock and awe idea of tearing down the enemy's will by destroying his command and control structure.
So what happens next for the guys down south as they're moving up? They're hearing about bomb damage assessment, about what's happened there in Baghdad?
Probably not. They're pretty well occupied at this time, and we'll go down here into the south and give you a glimpse of that. They're pretty much focused on what they're doing. You can see that they're moving out into these general areas nominally. And David Bloom gave us a really good report here when he said they moved out at 12:30. We can calculate, basically, they've had about 8 hours of running time. And so they're not along the border anymore. They're out in this general area. Interestingly enough, the report about Al Rumayya oil field, we're going to slip here to a picture of the last battle that occurred at Al Rumayya oil field. And when David gets out farther, perhaps he'll run into one of these tank battles, and you'll get a chance to see what it looks like. It's a pretty spectacular event, and this is what you get to see. These vehicles were taken out at anywhere between 4,000 and 2,000 meters, and that is actually about 500 meters south of the location that you heard on the air. Tom.
Very briefly, a lot of concern in Israel, obviously, about whether or not they'll come under attack, that he'll try to foment something in the wider Arab world. How secure is Israel tonight?
I think they're pretty secure. If we go out here to the western desert, you can see the problem. Saddam Hussein has to put his Scuds in this general area if he's going to range over here to Israel. And you can bet that there's people on the ground looking for those Scuds, satellites paying attention to it, you've got UAVs up looking for them, and you've got fighters ready to take them out the minute they're seen.
All right, thanks very much, retired General Monty Miggs, who, as I say, was leading an armored brigade across the desert 12 years ago. Let's go to the White House now. NBC's Campbell Brown has been very busy there. What can we expect overnight and tomorrow, Campbell?
Well, Tom, I'll tell you, the mood here this evening has gone from being cautiously pleased with the way things were going to a little more restrained with the news of the helicopter crash tonight and what appears to be the first American casualties. The president is in the residence this evening. He is getting evening phone calls with the latest developments, military developments, from Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, and then speaking with his national security advisor, who's really the closest to him personally, to get the final update before he goes to bed at night. We are not expecting him to have anything on his public schedule tomorrow, but he does have a meeting with congressional leaders, and given the developments, I wouldn't be surprised if he had some words tomorrow for the families of those soldiers. Administration officials, I'll tell you also tonight, are confirming what Jim Miklashevsky has been reporting for much of the evening, that there are conversations going on with some of the Iraqi leadership, possibly surrender talks. Not a lot of more detail from the administration, though one official telling me tonight there is nothing we would love more than to win this without a massive fight. So for now, they're keeping the president's schedule fairly flexible, though we do know he will leave the White House tomorrow and go to Camp David for the weekend. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, Campbell Brown, who's at the White House tonight. The reference she made was to a Sea-Knight, a Marine helicopter that went down. All 16 people on board were killed. I think it was within the borders of Kuwait when it did go down. That's a visual look at the Seahawk, and it has all the dimensions for it as well. It's a transport helicopter for the Marines. The Chinook is used by the Army and other services, but that's a very popular helicopter. Tragic accident tonight, 16 people dead. It may be a half a world away, but this war is reaching into the heart and heartland tonight. During the course of the war, NBC News is focusing on one small community where everyone knows someone whose life has been changed by this conflict. For them, there really is no other topic of conversation. Edie Magnus now in our town, Ashland, Alabama.
Now with war on the president.
The Turkey parliament will allow U.S. military to use Turkish airspace for the war with Iraq. Close call, the American side of night.
And his thought.
1 minute you're playing in a sandbox, next minute they're over there in a big sandbox, you know.
Leon's son, Brandon, is 19 and a Marine, the first Marine in his family, stationed with the Purple Foxes in Kuwait.
You know, I love my son, and we got to understand it.
The first bombs have fallen as the United States wages war in Iraq.
And all day long they piled into Little's Exxon to fill up on gas, coffee, and the latest from Baghdad. Josh Nelson works for the water department.
I hope all our boys will be safe, but I'm thankful we got a president to stand up and do what he says.
That sentiment is widespread here. The area is very pro-military. It has the highest percentage of National Guard volunteers in the country. Anyone who's not already there may be called up soon.
The United States is the only superpower left with the policemen of the world. If you got a problem with that, you got a bad problem.
But believe it or not, even here, there are those who don't share the hardline view. Ashland's lone Democratic judge, Johnny Rochester, is not afraid to disagree.
I think I'm the yellow dog, foaming at the mouth, yeah.
He just does it when they're not around.
I think at this point in time, you don't question anything. You say, here we are, the president's made his decision.
And at the National Guard Armory, a group as keenly interested as anybody in the minute-by-minute developments overseas. These are the folks whose National Guard unit is on high alert and may get the word to pick up and go anytime.
How many of you watched President Bush last night on television?
There may not have been a television in the schools, but the children were very tuned in to today's events. The second graders in Lisa McNatt's class, she's the mayor's wife, were worried.
What if some of Iraq's troops kind of like come over here and try to like bomb some of the houses or like shoot some of the missiles and stuff like that?
Well, that's why not all of our troops are over there. We still have a lot here.
In the first grade, the kids rallied around 7-year-old Hannah Smith. Hannah's father, Ashland's Chief Deputy Sheriff Jamie Smith, is in a National Guard unit that's already overseas.
From every mountainside, let freedom ring.
That's Edie Magnus in Ashland, Alabama. We're going to go by phone now to Dexter Filkins of the New York Times, who's moving into Iraq with a unit of British tanks. Dexter Filkins, what have you been seeing today?
Well, as you noted, we're with a bunch of tanks moving into Iraq, and the bombardment is continuing here. And there's been Apache helicopters in the sky, and there's been troops moving across. And I think they're all headed in the direction of Basra.
You saw last night a show that even shocked you, even though you're a veteran of Afghanistan. Has any of that been repeated in the daylight hours?
Well, it just continued through the nighttime here. I was amazed. I mean, even as late, it's going on right now, and it's continued intermittently for hours. You know, the range of the guns, most of these guns isn't more than 20 or 25 miles, and so it makes you wonder what they're shooting at. But they sure are laying down quite a barrage even now.
All right, Dexter Filkins, thanks very much for checking in. We hope that we can stay in touch with you during the course of the next couple of days or so, because it sounds like everything is moving north fairly swiftly at this hour. A reminder, so much of what is going on is what we cannot see or cannot hear. That's military action and possibly negotiation going on between the highest levels of this government and some officers of the Republican Guard. And where is Saddam Hussein and his sons tonight? The leadership. It's dawn of a new day in Baghdad. Is it just one more day, or is it the dawn of a new era? That's all for this edition of Dateline. For late developments in this fast-breaking story, MSNBC on cable and .com. I'm Tom Brokaw. Good night for all of us, including Stone Phillips, here at Dateline and NBC News.